I'm Joy.
And I'm Mariam.
I'm a TV presenter.
And I'm a scientist.
We are going to explore how genetics affects each and every one of us.
From medicine to dinosaurs.
From the food we eat to the way we are. So let's get into our first topic for
Generation Genome. In this episode, we're going to be talking about genetic conditions, IVF, and the myth of designer babies.
I've heard this phrase a lot, designer babies. Is that something we could actually do? Give a child a different eye colour, change their height, and even their hair?
It might be something that's possible, but we haven't explored whether it would be safe. It's illegal to genetically edit on embryos that lead to pregnancy. We need to think more about the ethical and moral questions involved.
And what about genetic conditions and diseases? Could genetic research help cure them?
There is a lot of research going on around this. We can screen embryos for abnormalities of the chromosomes and genetic conditions before it's even transferred into the womb. It's likely to become even more common and accessible than it is today.
Well, there are a lot of young people who have grown up with a genetic condition and are managing it, but you wouldn't necessarily know, as it isn't always obvious what people are going through. Thousands of teenagers are affected by genetic conditions here in the UK, including Sienna, who has sickle cell anemia, and Lily, who has cystic fibrosis. They're both young and living life to the full, even if at times it can get really tough.
So cystic fibrosis, I want to know, when did you find out that you actually had it?
My parents actually knew before I was born that I had CF, so I've always known.
And for you, Sienna?
I finally kind of realised what it was when I was 5. When I had my first crisis.
How does cystic fibrosis manifest in your day-to-day life?
I'd say the main thing that it affects every day is the timing. It's tablets whenever I eat food. I'd say about an hour of breathing treatments a day where you're like breathing into machines to like shake your lungs up to like help them. For some people with CF, like even walking too far of a distance, it wouldn't be like manageable at all because their lungs just wouldn't be able to manage it.
What do you know about the inheritance side of it being a disease or a condition that's passed down from parent to child?
Sickle cell is genetic. I kind of have to take my time with things. I get quite tired a lot.
And how does sickle cell affect your day-to-day life in terms of school and your social life?
It definitely does affect my social life. I can't go out with friends like every day after school. You kind of don't really want to be known as the person that's always sick or the person that, you know, you can't hang out with because they have, you know, difficulties. I have to make sure I'm well rested. And like if I go swimming, I have to check the pool temperature, make sure it's warm enough for me. If I go on a plane, I have to have oxygen because of I think it's high altitude.
How do you feel like it's handled in school and in the teaching of it?
With CF, I think it's taught it's only a lung disease, but it's like a lot more than that. It's like your lungs, it's your digestive system, like it's kind of pretty much all your organs. Like 98% of men with it are like infertile, and it's just like it's a lot. And I think with disabilities as a whole as well, like some of them you can't see because I don't think you look at me and think that I'm ill or anything like that. So I think just with disabilities as a whole, like there's a lot more than what you're taught and like than what people realise, I think.
Same as you, it's not just something inside of me, it's pretty much my whole life. And it needs to be talked about in schools.
Have you got to the place in your life where you kind of say, I have this thing, but I don't let it define me?
I think that's my aim with sickle cell, to help other people and kind of get myself, you know, to a better place where I'm comfortable.
I think you just kind of got to take each day as it comes, and it will come. You will like realise this isn't everything, but it's not easy.
And I know you have an Instagram where you document it.
I think the account is important for raising awareness, but also more so because of the amount of friends I've made with CF, most of which who I'd like consider my best friends, even though obviously people with CF can't meet face to face because of cross infections. So, but it's just nice to know a community of people who like can relate to you exactly.
What words and advice do you have for those watching that might have sickle cell or cystic fibrosis or any other genetic condition?
If you let it take over your whole being, then like that's what you're going to be. Because if I like labelled myself as Lily with CF, I think that would just become my whole existence, and then it does take over your whole life if you let it. Like a lot of people can't walk up the stairs with it, but like the fact I have ran half marathons and stuff, I think you've got to take ownership of it when you can.
Be yourself, you know, don't let it define you. You could be anything you want to be, and yeah, just don't let it define you, be strong.
It was so inspiring to hear the stories of both of these young women.
It really was, and in Lily's case, we saw that she'd run a half marathon, which is especially impressive because of the complications that cystic fibrosis comes with. Cystic fibrosis is an inherited disorder that can cause problems with oxygen levels and nutrient absorption. Sticky mucus builds up in the body's tubes and passageways, particularly the lungs and the digestive system. This leads to infections and problems with breathing and digesting food. All this is caused when a gene called CFTR is faulty and changes the way that salt and water move in and out of the cells. Around 1 in 25 people in the UK are carriers of the condition, with one faulty copy and one working copy of the CFTR gene. If two carriers have children, there's a 50-50 chance each child will inherit the faulty gene from one parent and be a carrier, and a 1 in 4 chance that they will inherit it from both parents and have the disease. And it was great to hear from Sienna too, who lives with sickle cell anemia.
It was, and sickle cell symptoms can be really unpredictable. Sometimes people who live with the condition experience pain which can get really extreme. This is called a crisis. It can last for hours, days, or even longer.
Red blood cells usually travel through our blood vessels without any problems, but because sickle cells are crescent-shaped, they can get hooked into one another and cause blockages.
And this is what causes the pain.
Eventually they'll be released and the cells can flow freely again.
I'm actually a carrier of the condition myself, so I don't have sickle cell, but because of my genes, there's a chance I could pass it on to my children. If I have a partner who's a carrier as well, there's a 1 in 4 chance our child would have sickle cell. Could gene editing alongside IVF help cure genetic conditions and diseases?
Well, gene editing therapies will hopefully be possible in the future. There are treatments being developed that can correct the gene mutation that causes sickle cell. But at the moment, we try to select embryos that aren't carrying any genetic mutations, then implant those into the womb.
Okay, so how does the process of IVF actually work?
Well, in a simple operation, the woman's eggs are collected directly from her ovaries and in a lab put together with her partner's sperm or the sperm from a donor. Hopefully, some of those eggs will be fertilized by the sperm, and that begins the journey to forming embryos. The embryos are allowed to grow for a few days in the lab. Then some of them are selected to be placed into the woman's uterus in the hopes of becoming pregnant. However, it's not easy. In the UK, the NHS says the successful birth rate after fertilization is only around 1/3 in women under 30, but this can vary. Another condition we should talk about is endometriosis. It happens when the same tissue that lines the womb is growing in places outside of the womb. This can cause all kinds of complications. It does tend to run in families, but we're not entirely sure what triggers it. About 1/3 of women with the condition can struggle to get pregnant. More research is needed to get to the bottom of why this happens, diagnose women earlier, and hopefully develop better treatments.
100%. Well, I met Rhiannon, who's considering IVF as she has endometriosis herself.
I've had problems since I was 12 years old. I've been in and out of surgery. I've had, I think, in total about 6 surgeries now. And every time they go in, every time they have to remove a cyst or something from your ovaries obviously become smaller, you get more scar tissue. Endometriosis can actually, if you get it on like your fallopian tubes or your ovaries, they can also stop the transport of the egg to meet the sperm and obviously fertilise. There's such a wide range of things how endometriosis can affect fertility. So over the last couple of years, since having my diagnosis, since realising that surgery isn't going to fix my problems, I've realised that I probably should consider freezing my eggs.
So you said it started when you were 12 or 13. I can't imagine how that must have been like at such a young age.
So when I first got my cyst at 12, they actually said that I was constipated, okay, and that is such, I feel like doctors use that as such a fallback for pelvic pain, stomach pain. I'm not even going to put it down. I was so scared. Trust your body. You know your own body. You know when something's wrong. Go to the doctors. If I'd been diagnosed earlier, would I have had this many surgeries? Would I now be at the point where I'm having to be in a medically induced menopause at the age of 20? So them thoughts do go through your head.
What changes do you want to make in the world in regards to endometriosis research?
So the role I want to go into is called a clinical embryologist. It's very competitive, but I'm very determined at the same time. So it's basically a mix between working in the lab and working with patients. So I'd be diagnosing why women or couples can't get pregnant, helping them, extracting the eggs, the whole IVF process.
Do you think as people know more about it, it'll become easier to talk about?
I think the problem is, the reason it takes so long to be diagnosed is because girls at a young age think, secondary school age, they go through puberty, they get told it's just period pain.
Right.
It's just painful periods.
It's
You're just having a pain. You'll grow out of it. You'll get better. Just give it a couple more years, go on the pill. I would go into school, and because endometriosis can cause these really heavy periods, I would be leaking through clothes, having to go home, and the school would be like, well, your attendance is under 80%. But around 60% of women don't know what endometriosis is, yet it affects 1 in 10 women.
That's a lot to be considering at a young age. Infertility is something many people go through.
Yeah, and as we know, IVF isn't an easy process.
So do you think perhaps gene editing should be considered if it could help potentially stop these life-changing conditions?
Well, that's a great and very controversial question, one I'm sure we'll get into in the group chat.
Stick around, we'll see you after the break. Welcome back to Generation Genome.
Next up is the group chat.
That's right, we were at the Gulbenkian Theatre at the University of Kent, and the audience had the chance to ask experts questions all about genetic conditions and living with your genomes.
Our first question was about whether we should use genetic engineering on embryos. Professor Shane, who specialises in research across different fields, thought we should consider it.
But he also agreed with the rest of the panel. Tito, who lives with sickle cell, Professor Alan, who works in IVF, and his daughter Phoebe, who studies science, thought that there were things to consider before going ahead with something like genetic engineering.
Hi, I'm Henry and I'm 16.
And what is your question?
Is it acceptable to genetically engineer embryos to get rid of health conditions such as cystic fibrosis?
I had a pretty major operation that, in a sense, edited me. They had to move a few things around inside me, and they edited me such that I would be healthy, and I'm still here now many years later. So in that sense, medical interventions take place all the time that can make us healthier. Of course, when we turn to the genome, to genetic editing, there's a concern that actually we're not just changing this or that, but we're actually changing the human being, we're changing the person. If the change could be made, I think it should be something we take very seriously as a possibility, as an option, and I suspect one day it will be happening.
It's important that if it was an option to ask parents or expecting parents. There's a lot of individual differences at play. For example, the cost of even raising a child is enormous, and now to add a condition on top of that, people may not actually be able to afford it. So that always, it trickles down to just the general care that the child will be able to receive throughout their life. So I still feel like my condition is very much a part of me and it makes me who I am. So with hindsight, obviously I wouldn't have made an effect back then, but I would have kept it exactly how it was. I'm really happy with what I've been able to do even with sickle cell. But yeah, I'm more of, okay, let's see what's there as opposed to changing it physically.
For me, and for regulators anyway, it has to be safe, but not only safe, effective, efficient. All of these words are really important, and that's how new treatments, new drugs, that's how they're all measured. It's not just are they safe. I know that gene therapy is really expensive. The most recent one touted for spinal muscular atrophy, which I'm really glad there's something available, I think would probably cost several million over a lifetime of a child.
Genetic editing is something very different. You're the potential is almost limitless, theoretically. And I think that's a very scary prospect, that you could change a lot more things than if you're just working with what you already have.
Something that can be done is screening for genetic diseases. I actually haven't had any tests to find out if I have a genetic condition.
I haven't had any genetic tests, but they only needed to look at my blood to know that I'm a carrier of sickle cell.
A couple of years ago, we all decided to have our whole genome tested. I was one of the people who got a clinically significant result, and suddenly I become like a patient because I found out I've got a BRCA1 mutation, which is a mutation that in women gives them a very high chance of having breast and or ovarian cancer. And of course, immediately, I didn't think just of myself because I knew it wasn't particularly clinically relevant for men, but I thought, I've got 2 daughters.
He was really worried to tell us that he had this mutation. I think you binge watched all of Game of Thrones, trying to
get through it.
Yeah, trying to get through it. And obviously, yeah, it's been a struggle coming to terms with the fact that I have a 50% chance of having this mutation passed on from him. I mean, I think everyone has different views on whether they want to know these things about themselves, about their genes. But I know that personally, I do. And it's quite hard because you're quite impatient and you just want to know. But you also feel like once you know, you might wish that you hadn't asked in the first place.
I think a big issue surrounding sickle cell is people knowing their genotype, knowing whether they have a chance of passing it on, that being the trait or the full-blown condition. So it's really important. In my case, my parents both knew they had the trait and they both tested for sickle cell before I was even born, so while I was in the womb. Some people don't understand the seriousness of it. They don't understand the implications until they actually are in the situation where, for example, they have a child with sickle cell and it's suddenly, oh, I didn't know much about it, I didn't know what happened to me, and then they're kind of rushing to do what they can to support their child or whoever they have in their circle who has sickle cell.
Our next question compared the ethics of screening and discarding embryos to genetically engineering them.
Morally, people have different opinions about this, but scientifically there's a big difference between the two.
I'm Maryam and I'm 16.
And what's your question to our panel?
Why is screening and discarding deceased embryos any different morally to genetically editing embryos?
Most people have accepted in this country and around the world that through IVF you make lots of embryos, you transfer them, people have babies, that's all very good news. But there's many embryos that don't get transferred and eventually they get discarded. That's the unpalatable truth. So that's no different morally. What is different is there's a practical difference between screened embryos and genetically edited embryos. And that's that if you genetically edit an embryo, you're changing something about its genome for all future generations. Not to say it's necessarily dangerous, but we just don't know the long-term effects. With the screening of embryos, you're not changing the embryo, you're just saying, these are the embryos I'm going to keep, and these are the embryos I'm not going to keep. So you haven't changed anything, you've just kind of accelerated or condensed that reproductive journey.
The next question started a conversation about screening for traits like eye colour and height.
Alan was a firm no, and I would say pursuing designer babies would negatively impact the diverse and unique society we live in.
Shane also wanted us to consider the ethics of science like this and the importance of holding scientists to account so they don't do unethical things.
Hello, my name's Juliette and I'm 14.
And what is your question for our lovely panel?
Is it ever okay to screen the genes of embryos for traits not important for health, such as eye colour, height or athletic ability?
Right now, I'd say no, it's not okay. In this country, we have a strong legal and regulatory framework in place that wouldn't allow it. Why do this now when we don't have the resources to help people who have health conditions?
I think one of the really interesting things that we've all experienced as we've been through COVID is that recognition of just how important science is to all of us, what a difference it can make in our lives. But then, crucially, you never have this thing, pure science and no questions around how do we use it? What difference can it make? How can it benefit us? And that's where I think those other disciplines come in when we're thinking about ethical questions. There can never be a purely scientific answer to a question like that. You need those other disciplines, those other perspectives to inform that discussion, I think.
And finally, we had a question about the disparity or the gap in wealth when getting access to this expensive technology.
Hi, I'm Mazin Safi and I'm 16 years old.
And what is your question?
If wealthy people benefit most from being able to afford genetic screening, will this lead to a greater inequality of health between the rich and the poor?
I think it's something we need to think very, very seriously about. But I think we need to recognise we're already there with that kind of inequality, and we should be dealing with that now in other parts of healthcare, all aspects of healthcare, before we get on to talking about any kind of genetic screening.
They were all our audience questions, and afterwards I spoke to 4 incredible students from the school. They told me all about what they learned about genetic technology.
You can create your own baby. That it's not worth to go and get your children tested for to change their eye colour, for example, to brown to green, or check if they're going to be athletic, and you should focus this more on medical conditions.
I've learnt about not only the ethical problems, but also the practical problems of screening and genetic engineering. Some of my friends have mentioned genetic disease in their family and stuff, but really not much. I've learnt quite a lot today. I'm not sure if this is just because I'm young, but I wasn't aware of, the quantity and the amount of people with genetic disorders that are life-changing or serious in some way. A lot of the people who are on that show, they seem like, regular people that I'd see on the street and I'd talk to and I'd be friends with. It just wouldn't occur to me that they'd have such a life-changing genetic disease.
I haven't really done genetic diseases yet, but I think I've got the idea from my brother that it's very futuristic, the curing of genetic diseases, and it's never really talked about as being something that's done sort of often in medicine today.
One of our friends has FND, which is functional neuron disease, and he can't come to school really anymore and stuff, and it's hard, but we're still friends, and he's still a nice guy, and I see him and stuff. On the days when he is in school, it's like we try and savor the moments, like really, like we just kind of talk like as if he isn't in a wheelchair and stuff. I think that's better for both of us, really.
We then moved on to what they think about genetic testing.
Sometimes knowing the results can be helpful, but it can also be scary.
If there's treatment of the genetic disease, there's almost an obligation to screen for it, and if it's treatable.
Did you know about the ethical side of this topic before, or was that all news today?
Yeah, you sort of see it as quite controversial, and it's a question of letting something live and letting something die, and that sort of makes you ask the question, who has the power to make that decision?
Definitely. Do you think any of you would get your genome read?
I don't think I get it fully read, but I would probably like to know.
What about you?
Yeah, I'd probably get it read.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
There is probably something wrong with all of us, and reading your genetics, it is likely that you're going to find a fault with yourself. That also makes the question a lot harder whether you should read your genetics.
It's great to see the students learning about and discussing these topics, and there's always more room for people to join the world of scientific research.
Yes, we've got to keep the technology developing, and the last question I asked was about how knowing what they learnt today is going to affect their future.
When I have got all the qualifications I need, it will probably be much more advanced, and I think in the future I might be involved in genetic engineering a bit more.
Amazing. What about you?
This is quite fascinating, so I might kind of go down that path in my career as well as a surgeon, if that makes any sense.
Well, that was a great discussion. There's really a lot to consider when you're a scientist making these life-changing decisions.
There is, but it's got to be done.
Well, that's all from us for now. Join us next time on
Generation Genome.